For 9.5, and this begins on page, it does not begin on page, this begins on page 590 evidently. We've got the idea here of tokenizing strings. The text glosses over something that is tremendously important here, and we'll just clean up and cover it. A tokenization essentially means we're going to take a string and we're going to break it down into components that we need. Those things we need are a token. So the method, and I actually mean that in like the classes method that we're going to use here to do that, is called split, S-P-L-I-T. So what value is in that? It is glossed over here on page 591. It's the idea of a regular expression, or regex. That is big when we're talking about data. That's huge when we look at big data. What regular expression suggests is that if we have a string, or if we have a file full of strings, or if we have, databases full of strings, that we should be able to look for patterns in those strings and return, smaller, or not necessarily smaller, but different strings that have those pieces of meaning parceled out from there. So a regular expression says, hey, look, we're going to search for this pattern in a string. And when we find that pattern, we're going to either strip it out, or we're going to only include that pattern. And we're going to save it back into another array of strings so that, somebody or some process can go through it and do further manipulation on that data. So regular expression is huge, and you're going to see that concept when you're looking at databases. You're going to see that concept when you're working with things like JavaScript, and it's going to come up again. And, I would be happy if you could just plant that someplace in the back of your mind, and one day you're like, yes, that's a regular expression. That would be fantastic. The vehicle that we're going to use for that in this chapter, or this portion of the chapter, is the split method. So here we can see an example of it. It's on 591. We are going to take a string, and the dot split is the method that we're calling there. So you'll notice here we have this particular bit of code. String, and we can tell it's an array of strings, right? Because we've got the left and right brace there. And we're going to call that tokens. Because again, this is tokenizing a string. We're looking for bits of data from within a string that we can action on. So we are creating an array of strings called tokens. And what we are going to do to assign values to the elements in that array is we're going to take the string called str, and we're going to run it through this split method. And inside of the parens and inside of the double quotes in the parens, you'll see we have, the space character, A and D characters, and then the space character. So string has 1 space and, 2 space and, 3, so on and so forth. And what we want to do is split the space A and D space characters out of that. And every time we do that, we're going to return the previous portion of that string into a new element in the array called tokens. So what does that look like? When we run str through split, it returns to us this down here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each of those we can iterate through using the simplified for loop here. So we are advancing through tokens for each one of the elements in the array tokens, save that, or store that rather, temporarily in a string called S, and just print line for S. We're going to see this again in the code sample, but it's really not any more complicated than that. We are using split to remove some piece of the pattern that we know to look for. We are saving whatever happens like to the left of that string into a new array element, and when we're done we can iterate through that array and see what the outcomes are. So here, this is on page 592. If we are looking for multiple delimiters, they're referred to as. So if we're looking for multiple characters, that happens right inside of here. So we have inside of our method call to split, we still have our double quotes. Inside of the double quotes, we have the left and right brace. Inside of the left and right brace, we have the at symbol and the dot. Those are the symbols that we're going to look for in our string. I know that's terrible verbiage. I practiced it 4 times. I could not shorten that any for you. So we will see that again with different characters or different delimiters as they're called here. We will see those in the code sample. The very last piece here is to think about trimming a string before you tokenize it. So what does that mean? It just means get rid of any superfluous characters. Just get rid of any spaces, new line characters, things of that nature. Get those out of there so that you're just left with the string without any of that crap in it. And that'll help, reduce the time it takes to go through. And again, we're never going to feel the benefit of that. But with really big pieces of data, that does help. So tokenizing is simply the process of going through and stripping the important pieces out of a string and storing them as elements in another array so that you can use them to do data operations.